afternoon and welcome.
Thank you, thank you.
I am Mary Thompson, and I was the struggling widow who lived in this house when all the ruckus happened in July 1863. Before that few days, Confederate soldiers were going through the town, stealing food and supplies from the people of Gettysburg. Some paid for those goods with worthless Confederate money. Talk about adding insult to injury. But they left me pretty much alone here in my little house on the edge of town until the 1st of July, the morning of the 1st. That's when all the cannons started booming and the bullets whizzing and all damnation broke loose. Many of the people who lived in this area fled the area. But despite my 70 years, I was determined to stay here and try as I might to alleviate the human suffering all around. I had my daughter Hannah, who lives just a ways, bake up a barrel of bread, bake up a barrel of flour into bread, and I carried that bread to the wounded and dying who littered this area. For 3 days I attended those poor wretches, and I ripped up my bed sheets and my pillows and my bolsters and virtually all of my clothes except the ones I wore on my back to make bandages. People tried to persuade me to leave, but I said, "In God is my trust," and I stayed. And I lived through that great ordeal. Now, I would like to introduce you to a special person, my very dear friend, and the owner of this house, the Honorable Thaddeus Stevens.
So good to be back in Gettysburg. A very special friend, Mary Thompson.
The honor is all mine, Mr. Stevens. I am so grateful to you and that you came and all that you've done for me.
Wow, it's just a meager effort on my behalf.
Oh, you are much too modest, Mr. Stevens. After all, you saved my life. Back in 1846, I was just a poor widow living in this house with 8 children. And I was about to be forced out on the street. And you bought this house at a sheriff's sale. And you allowed me to stay here for 27 years, paying you only a pittance, and only when and if I could. You truly are my savior, Mr. Stevens.
Well, I certainly appreciate your gratitude. And I also congratulate you on your heroic efforts to minister to the poor victims of this battle on that day in July.
I did my best. But you also suffered grievously, Mr. Stevens. I recall that as the rebels were coming from Chambersburg here to Gettysburg, they burned your Caledonia ironworks and stole the food from all of your 250 workers and their families.
Yes, it was a cowardly deed done against a defenseless people. And to be as a finale to that, Jubal Early directed his men to knock out all the windows of the workers' houses, just in spite. That cost me $75,000, that raid, but I consider it a cheap price to pay if the government of our country is restored throughout the land without a vestige of slavery. But my main concern is for the poor people of my ironworks, left without jobs. I had to provide for them.
You were truly a one-man almshouse, Mr. Stevens. Where were you when the Caledonia Iron Works were destroyed.
Oh, I was actually at the works a few days before the raid. But we got advance warning, and I beat a hasty retreat to Shippensburg. Now, the chivalry was very disappointed that I wasn't there. In fact, Jubal Early told my manager that if he had found me there, he would have hanged me on the spot and distributed my bones to the several Confederate states as curiosities. But my manager also tried to reason with Early, or as he's known as Lee's bad old man, to not destroy the Iron Works because we weren't making any money there. We were just keeping it open for the sake of the people. And Early's reply was, Yankees don't do business that way.
They were a despicable lot, and I am glad we are rid of them.
Well, talking about a lot, we have a special guest today, General Robert E. Lee. Welcome to your temporary headquarters that you used during the Gettysburg Battle. And in the spirit of hospitality and in positive ideas, I'd like to thank you wholeheartedly for losing the battle and the war. It was one of the great defeats for mankind.
While I have little appreciation of your renowned sarcasm, Mr. Stevens, the questions that were in dispute between the states and the general government, which unhappily were not decided by the dictates of reason, but rather by the, well, that is referred to the decision of war, that was decided against us. It is the part of wisdom to acquiesce in the result, and of candor to recognize the fact. But I want you to know that although I fought against the people of the North, because I believe they were seeking to wrest from the South its dearest rights, I have never cherished toward them bitter or vindictive feelings, and have never seen the day when I did not pray for them.
That is all very well and good, General Lee, but I must tell you, your occupation of my house for meetings and meals caused me great distress. Although you were, indeed, a perfect gentleman most of the time, your attendants were involved in robbery and general destruction. But even you, at the beginning of the war, ordered me to fetch all of my jams and jellies and 3 bottles of medicinal wine. And you said that you were going to make those Yankees dance.
I do not recall that last part. I do wish to beg your forgiveness for any inconveniences we may have caused you.
I thank you for your apology, General Lee. And I must also thank you for the mercy that you showed the town of Gettysburg. As I recall, on July 4th, as you were preparing to retreat, I overheard a conversation with you and General Stewart, in which General Stewart said he wanted to shell the town of Gettysburg and leave it a smoldering ruin. But you rejected that idea.
Yes, I do remember that. I said I have never done such a thing before, and I did not intend to begin doing so in this location.
I must also thank you for your kindness. I understand that after Early destroyed my iron mill and robbed my people of their provisions, that you came through with your troops. And you were so appalled by what you saw that you allowed the people to draw from your commissary. Even though the commissary probably came from other Pennsylvania farmers, it was still a gracious act.
Yes. Well, it was the least I could do for those poor people. But I believe it is possible that the good General Early had not gotten my explicit directive not to destroy civilian property. But it is possible, perhaps, that he made an exception in your case.
Perhaps. But I must ask you, why did you reject the leadership of the Union Army and instead embrace the leadership of the Traitors' Confederacy? As the son of a Revolutionary War hero, Light Horse Harry Lee, and the grandson-in-law of George Washington, you could have set an example for the South and brought the war to a much quicker end.
And as I said at the time, a union that can only be maintained by force of swords and bayonets, and in which strife and civil war are to take the place of brotherly love and kindness, have no charm for me. If the union be dissolved and government disrupted, I shall return to my native state and share the miseries of my people and save in defense. I will not draw my sword against any person.
You certainly did draw your sword against many people, and the North was draped in black crape. But, fortunately, because of you prolonging the war, people such as myself were able to pressure Lincoln into issuing the Emancipation Proclamation and then passing the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery. Now, the irony of it all is that even though you fought to preserve slavery, you said you were against slavery.
Yes, and in this enlightened age, there are few, I believe, but what will acknowledge that slavery as an institution is a moral and political evil. Now, it is more so for the white man than the black race. The blacks are immeasurably better off here than they would otherwise be in Africa, morally, socially, and physically. The current painful discipline they are undergoing is necessary for their instruction. As a race, how long their subjugation may be necessary is known and ordered by a wise and merciful providence.
Perhaps if you had fought as vigorously against slavery as you fought for the Confederacy, God's will would have been revealed to you sooner. I could never bow down to a deity whose footstool is the crushed necks of the suffering millions, and who rejoices in the tyrant's lash and the tortured victim's cries.
I do not believe that the abolitionists had the right to take any action beyond that of moral suasion of individual slaveholders. Yet I rejoice that slavery was abolished. I believe it will be greatly for the interests of the South. So fully am I satisfied of this as regards Virginia in particular, that I would cheerfully have lost all that I have lost by the war, and have suffered all that I have suffered, to have attained that one goal, the end of slavery.
Well, I must give you my condolences for having to be a college president after the war. But I also have to ask you another question about the kidnapping of hundreds of freed black people in the Chambersburg and Gettysburg area before and during the battle. I know of one farmer who came up to a wagon load of these unfortunate victims and asked the driver, "Are you taking the babies too?" And the driver says, "Oh yes, they will fetch something."
I do not recall anything about these particular actions. You must understand, Mr. Stevens, I gave my subordinates a wide latitude of action, and after it is all over, a stupid fellow as I am, I can see that mistakes were made. I noticed, however, that my mistakes are rarely told to me until it is too late.
Do you have a question for me?
I have a question for you, Mr. Stevens. Why were you so severe in your actions toward the South after the war? Why did you bar the Southern representatives from entering Congress after the war? And why didn't you follow the sentiments of President Abraham Lincoln when he said, malice toward none and charity for all?
My objective was to school the South in Republican ways and to protect the freed slaves. I did not want to admit those who had slaughtered 500,000 of our countrymen until their clothes were dried and they were reclad. I did not want to sit side by side of men whose garments smell of the blood of my kindred.
Wasn't that a bit harsh? I had urged my fellow Southerners to reconcile themselves to defeat. All should unite in honest effort to obliterate the effects of the war and to restore the blessings of peace.
Well, that's a fine sentiment, but it was not carried out in the South. We found them to be unrepentant secessionists, attacking free blacks, particularly in the violence of New Orleans and Memphis in 1866. I found that during the time that we were coming up with Reconstruction plans, that loyal men, both white and black, were bleeding from every pore. One of my colleagues accused me of wanting to create a penitentiary to hold 8 million people. And I said, yes, a penitentiary at the points of the bayonets. And if they come up here, we'll shoot them. That's how they have to be treated, at least for a while.
Extremely harsh, Mr. Stevens.
Perhaps, but necessary to create the new republic dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. I have done what I've done for the sake of humanity. It is easy to protect the interests of the rich and powerful, but it is a great ordeal to protect the rights of the poor and downtrodden. It is the eternal ordeal of Sisyphus, forever to be renewed. It is not popular, but if there is anything that I have complete indifference, in fact contempt, is the public opinion based on popular clamor. Now, I do want to say, we do agree that putting up monuments to Confederates can be offensive. And I said during one congressional session, one of my colleagues said that we should be more forgiving and consider the murderers of our soldiers as part of the common dead. And at the time I said, if that was heard by the victims of Gettysburg, they would break out of their graves and haunt you until your eyeballs were seared.
I agree. And ought we not also to include the monuments to the Union? Now, as I said late in life, I think it wiser not to keep open the sores of war, but to follow the examples of those nations who endeavored to obliterate the marks of civil strife and to commit to oblivion the feelings that engendered.
Well, hopefully the descendants of this new republic, cleansed of slavery, will take our counsel on that matter.
And I must thank you, gentlemen, and all of you, for doing me the honor of paying me a visit during your visit to Gettysburg. And I hope that on this day, July 4th, when our nation was founded and rescued again, saved here in Gettysburg 87 years later, that we can all agree that we are now a nation indivisible, with the promise of liberty and justice for all.
Amen.
Well, now I'll answer any questions, though we're sort of short on expertise on Robert E. Lee. We're more on expertise of Thaddeus Stevens. So I don't know how many of you know who Thaddeus Stevens is outside. This may be the first introduction to him, but we'll try answering any questions you may have. Just to let you know, the script was based on actual quotes from Robert E. Lee and Thaddeus Stevens. About the only quote I got from Mary Thompson was, "In God we trust."
But she's becoming a Gettysburg icon.
So, any questions? No, okay.
Was there any evidence that Thaddeus and Robert E. Lee ever really contacted each
Nope,
other?
no evidence at all.
Makes it easier.
No, I also, I didn't work this into the script, but it's interesting that they stole all the food from Robert E. Lee's, from Thaddeus Stevens' Caledonia Ironworks and then set up in his house. So you could actually say that Thaddeus Stevens housed and fed the invasion of Gettysburg.
Ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
What happened to the ironworks after the battle?
That's an interesting question, and I've researched that, and from everything I can find out, he actually rebuilt it. And the question is, how did he find the money to rebuild it? Actually, friends of his, and I would like to have friends like this, took up a collection for him in Lancaster, where he was living at the time, and they collected $100,000 for him. But he refused to take that and said it was given to the poor fund of Lancaster, which was obviously a very rich fund at that point. And somehow he raised money to rebuild Caledonia and get it back into operation. There is speculation that he got the money from friends in the railroad business. He was very tight with people that were building the transcontinental railroad and such like that. Oh, get together, yeah, okay.
There you go.
I'm not just
Looking
being
good.
fully here.
Okay,
I'm on business.
so you get in the proper mood.
Yeah, Thaddeus looked like that. Everything's fine.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
That's my problem, I
didn't
smile
have
too
that.
much.
How long did Stevens
Can you
read?
give one more?
Sure.
She has a question.
Okay.
I'll wait till they're
Get the photo.
Good seeing you.
sober.
Okay. Yeah, good trip.
No. Mrs. Thompson, were you ever compensated for your losses here?
I
Yes,
would have
you
to.
were. Yes, you were. You did put in for compensation from the government, including all of the bolsters and
Yeah.
the dresses she tore up.
There's a
And also her garden, which
Yeah.
was destroyed by the Confederates, because they just sort of tore that up.
When did you get the money? When was that? When did she get the money?
Well, you're asking hard questions. I do not know that. It was sometime after the war.
Is she still alive?
No, she died. She died.
That's what I thought. Oh, well.
The workers at the ironworks were mostly African American, right?
No, it was a mixture. It had one of the largest number of African Americans, but it had a variety of different people. It was an integrated workforce.
And those who were African American, were they still there on June 26th for Early's raid, or had they?
A lot of the blacks in all of that area took off if they could, because they knew that people were being rounded up.
Right.
And such like that.
Right, but they came back after?
I believe so. I'm not certain about that, but I'm pretty certain. There was a place called Africa where it was a black community just down the road from Caledonia. Now it's called Brownsville, and that's where, and you can even find graves there of the United States colored troops in that area.
Didn't Stevens continue paying his workers after the war?
Yes, we did. Well, after the destruction from Jubal Early.
But after the war.
After the war,
Well, there wasn't much left to do there.
well, I mean, he got the thing, but going back, no one really covered it or did any, and the biographies is very sketchy. They sort of have Jubal Early destroying it and then just a few biographers have ever talked about, like From Brody wrote a little bit about him when he started it, but most of his biographers just kind of ignore it, you know.
It's maybe a sad and also ironic comment about the ironworks that less true now than it was, thanks to Ross's efforts in the society and others, that when you would ask people within a 10-mile radius if they knew who Thaddeus Stevens was, they said, oh yeah, sure, he's that promiscuous blacksmith up in Caledonia.
He was not the blacksmith, no. Yes.
Yeah, how long did Stevens remain in Congress after
Yeah,
the
it was
war?
interesting. He was in Congress in 2 separate times. He was first elected as a Whig in 1848, and he served 2 terms until 1852. But, and this was over in Lancaster. He lived in Gettysburg first, and then he moved over to Lancaster where he was a congressman. Now, he lost his seat in 1852 because he defended blacks who formed a resistance group and killed a slave owner trying to recover his slave, known as the Christiana riots. And he, because of his defense, which he got everybody off, by the way, because he was like the super lawyer of Pennsylvania. And anyway, he lost his seat as a Whig. Then, in 1858, 6 years later, he comes back and gets elected as a Republican and serves from 1858 to 1868 when he died down in Washington.
Mary, were any of your children with you during the days of the battle, with you being in the house?
No.
No, they
It's
were
just
all
you?
moved out. Hannah lived down, you know, in the area, and she came over and helped.
Who wrote about Mary?
Hmm?
Where did you find the writings about Mary? You say we don't have a lot of quotes from her, but somebody wrote about her, right?
Well, Tim Smith there? No, he's not. We have to give that credit to Tim Smith, who wrote a booklet about the Lee's headquarters and talks about Thaddeus Stevens' involvement in Mary Thompson. She was actually, it's amazing reading about her, she was a great hero of the battle and probably should be remembered more than Jenny Wade. It just was unfortunate that he just lost, got was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Okay.
I have a question I was kind of over there, so maybe.
Oh, sorry that you couldn't
It's for
squeeze in here.
Mary Thompson. Do you know where you were during the battle? Did you sleep in
Yes,
the homes?
lived in the house and generally used it for meetings
But not
and meals, but did not sleep here. So I lived in the
Are you a
house.
descendant of Mary Thompson?
No.
No, okay, you look like somebody I think. No. Yes.
The question is for General Lee. Are you aware of any portion, for those who might want to come back, in the Gettysburg area in the next coming weeks that might showcase some other elements of the Civil War?
Well,
some
that's-
of our
yes, that's
visitors
right.
might want to entertain themselves with.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. That is a very suggestion. Yes, very soon, on French Independence Day, the 14th of July, there's going to be a production. Mr. Miller will be portraying the Union officer Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain in Civil War Voices at the Gettysburg Community Theater, number 49 York Street. I'm directing, and I will be handing this costume off to another gentleman who will be portraying Robert E. Lee in that show.
That's the property of the Thaddeus Stevens Society.
This belongs to the society. Shane, did you have something else to comment about it?
No, I just wanted to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah.
Being that we are showcasing various elements of the Civil War, including slavery, the various battles, the Little Round Top, etc.
Well, it is an amazing show. It's called a musical, but it is not your typical Broadway hit musical. There's music of the period, dance of the period, and various scenes that really cover the entire period of the war. If you remember the Ken Burns documentary, Civil War, on PBS, this would be sort of like that set to music from the standpoint that it reflects more than the military, the lives and reactions and experiences to the war by civilians and townspeople, not just in Gettysburg, but in the South and southern places, in the northern areas, and families, life, romantic relationships that are interpreted through the music and the song and the dance. And so you have that unusual perspective. You remember from the Ken Burns, the Mary Chestnut letters and diaries. So those are not in this, but there are other comparable ones. The playwright who wrote the book of this musical, as a young man, went up to the attic, forbidden to look in the old great-great-grandfather's trunk, found a diary of the Alabama Confederate officer who was his great-great-grandfather. And he wrote this play, musical, with a composer based on that. So like, as what you've just seen, I would say 90% at least, Shane, would you back me up on this, of the book for the musical, Civil War Voices, is based on actual materials from civilians during that time.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, there you go. So tickets are available online, and thanks for mentioning it.
I have one more question. Wasn't the Lee Mansion, now, was Robert E. Lee connected with that, the Lee Mansion in Arlington?
Arlington,
And
yeah.
he was the owner of that?
Yes.
Oh, okay. And did he give it up willingly?
No. No, but as you may know, there are other Lee homesteads. I grew up with members of the family in suburban Philadelphia, direct descendants. Robert E. Lee had one daughter, as you know. And I also interviewed a number of times Robert E. Lee IV, who lives in one of the ancestral homes. I think it might be Stratford, I'm not sure, in Virginia. Very fine gentleman, and I think he's still with us, Robert E. Lee IV.
No, his Arlington home was actually confiscated by the government, and just to kind of, as a punishment, they buried the dead in this, like his front yard. So that's Arlington Cemetery now.
Okay, yeah.
Did he have to what was it? He had to physically come back and pay the taxes on the estate?
I don't know about
She
that.
did.
But
She, okay.
She did, but she didn't want to do that. She knew it was $92.07, and she knew she'd be arrested if she'd go there.
Correct.
So she sent her unionist cousin to pay the tax,
But they wouldn't
would not
accept it.
It was called an act for the collection of direct taxes in the insurrectionary districts within the United States, and she didn't want to go, and they wouldn't accept it from him. So her house went up for sale because of unpaid taxes.
And so when you go to Arlington Cemetery, it's a portion of the Lee's original estate.
Oh, it's the whole thing?
It is the whole, all of it,
Yes.
okay.
How many of you know when and by whom Robert E. Lee's U.S. citizenship was restored?
Oh, it's a modern day.
Raise your hand.
I think, oh, no idea. I think it was Jimmy Carter.
It's earlier than that.
Oh, okay.
Lyndon Baines Johnson, 1965.
Oh, okay.
Oh, my goodness.
But Lee did not, he didn't vote after that. That's right. Johnson might.
I have a question for Stevens. Is there any Lancaster connection between Stevens and General Reynolds?
they probably knew each other, but I mean, there wasn't any, I don't think they worked together in any significant way or anything like that.
Members of the Reynolds family stayed, and may still be in the Lancaster area. Are you related?
Just curious.
He's related to somebody.
Yeah, who are you related to?
If I'm related to somebody to be O'Rourke who was killed on the ground, I would be related to him,
Right.
if so.
I know that General Lee left at some point to go back to Arlington House because he wanted to become aware of who had run away and had that kind of thing in terms of the enslaved population. But when he was confronted with it, he simply said, okay, so I wish them well. As they wanted to ask, they asked him, well, do you want us to do something about it? And he said, no, let them go, I wish them well.
Are you talking about runaway slaves?
Yes, those who left, when he left, when the war started, some did manage to get away.
He was not so forgetting before the war.
No, of course not. No, well, there's so much story there in history. But I'm related to your wife.
You are.
Wow.
Thank you. I think we've spoken about this before. I don't recall all the facts.
Oh, in Gettysburg.
Yeah.
We probably did, because I performed probably did. That's right.
Thank you for reminding me.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And we do have material over there. If you want to take up some information about Thaddeus Stevens.
Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays. No, it's at the Gettysburg